We frequently hear that we're supposed to find a purpose in life. And I'm often worried that this kind of talk show idea of we're meant to have a purpose and a passion and all of that frequently distracts people from their real lives. That people often worry, why don't I have a purpose? What is my purpose supposed to be? It's often believed that as long as I go around helping other people, I've got a purpose. As long as I do something significant to the world, or that impacts on other people in some way, or makes things better than they were, better than if I make someone's life better than they were, or make the world a little bit better, that is the meaning of a purpose in life. This constant idea that purpose is associated with something outside of ourselves, that something we're supposed to know or somehow find, and that if we don't know it, we've got problems and issues and kind of need to go on Oprah. Of course, I don't think that could be what purpose is about. And why should it be, firstly, that everyone's supposed to be doing something to impact the world? Most people have got enough to worry about in their own lives. And secondly, this idea that there's some magical passion that I kind of don't know about, even though I'm me and an adult, as I said, creates a lot of dis-ease for people and kind of doesn't make sense. Surely things like purpose should come from within. Well, the psychologist Abraham Maslow, famous for his hierarchy of needs that I'll talk about in a moment, developed the idea that would later be called self-actualization, that each of us has the capacity to live our potentials to the fullest. Our job must be to identify our own potential and live that to the maximum. And the process of doing that does not require external information and discovery of what your passion is, but it's about learning to be a certain type of human being with a certain type of attitude to the world. And it is that will help us fully realize our potential and fully self-actualize. Self-actualization is defined as the complete realization of one's potential, the full development of one's abilities, and the appreciation of life. Although the term wasn't coined by the psychologist Abraham Maslow, he later does use it, and it's very much based on his philosophy, later developed by other thinkers. Many are familiar with Carl Rogers, for example, many others, but Maslow really defines the core of it. People are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he says first we have to meet basic needs, like water, food, warmth, rest. Then safety needs, safety and security, place to live, and so on. Then psychological needs, close relationships and love. Then esteem needs, feelings of accomplishment, feelings of prestige. And only after we've achieved all of that can we achieve self-realization, reaching one's fullest potential. Now Maslow based his ideas very much on that pyramid structure. So that pyramid, the idea that self-actualization can only be achieved after all of that, also does things like imply that therefore people in poverty would never reach it. And not only is that absurd even on the principles of self-actualization, as you'll hear later on, but also then is clearly discriminatory and judgmental, does not make sense, because clearly the ability for people to reach self-actualization in reality is not based on their economic status. It's independent of that. So Maslow's pyramid is a little bit of a misleading way to understand it. Ultimately, though, self-actualization is one of the most important things for a conscious human being who wants to live better, live with other humans better, live on this planet better. Self-actualized people can actually be as flawed as the rest of us, as human, and behave as badly as the rest of us, but they have a certain number of characteristics that is the core of who they are, that defines a lot of who they are and how they handle the world. And by understanding their characteristics and how we can nurture those characteristics, we're all capable of moving further and further towards this state of self-actualization. So what are those characteristics? The first most commonly noted characteristic is that of acceptance. Acceptance of themselves and acceptance of other people. Acceptance of their own flaws and of other people's flaws. And tolerance and even a little bit of humor when understanding those flaws and understanding each other and themselves. And of course there's that ability to be true to oneself and non-judgmental in those circumstances. Then self-actualized people are quite self-reliant. That strong acceptance of the self is often based on a great deal of independence, a great deal of resourcefulness and self-reliance. They usually don't depend on other people, on other resources outside of themselves. They don't have to follow what the done thing is or what one ought to do. They're following their own guidance in that way. And in fact, often like spending a lot of time alone, and that is one of the characteristics that is frequently noted about them. Not only can they spend a lot of time alone, but they actually like spending a lot of time alone. That doesn't mean they have to be. One of the characteristics of self-actualized people is that they cultivate very deep relationships with other people, that they're very loving by nature, and that they very easily cultivate those loving relationships on the one hand, and they respond to other people in the same way. So they tend to be able to show appreciation and gratitude very easily, even for the simplest things. They very readily show that gratitude or response, and often very spontaneously. And spontaneity is another characteristic of self-actualized people. People who are not stuck too much in the script, but are actually able to respond to situations as they emerge and express themselves in that way. So what you're hearing there is also that they're very real people. That is a very fundamental concept in the idea of self-actualization. And as a result, they're very easily able to tell the difference between what is real and what isn't. In other words, what's superficial and not so important, what's the real meaning behind something. They very naturally can discern those things. Also, their opinions are their own, very clearly. So they don't rely on others' opinions, and they don't necessarily take the prevailing view. So much so to the extent that they don't depend on their environment or their culture or their political environment or whatever to form their opinions and determine their views for them. That is a very important point. It doesn't mean they're rebellious and they automatically reject those things. It means that they're coming from themselves. So typically, self-actualized people have a strong moral and ethical center, which guides them in forming their opinions and dealing with whatever might be going on in the world, rather than being subject to prevailing views and social pressures. They perceive reality very clearly. It's often said they've got a superior relationship with reality, and they're not threatened by things they don't understand and things that they don't know. They're able to accept whatever's going on, bring their own knowledge to it, and understand it from a reality point of view. So much so that they're very often attracted to things they don't know, said Maslow. So they not only tolerate things they don't understand and they don't know, but they tend to be drawn towards those things which are often not structured and which gives them the opportunity to understand things from their own point of view. Of course, that is related a lot to that acceptance and spontaneity that I've spoken about, where they respond to the world very openly, very non-judgmentally, and very naturally. rather than creating a problem or seeing something as a problem or seeing that they have to follow a prevailing view. In fact, they are able to identify and pursue the problem. Some people say they tend to have a mission in life. I'm a little skeptical about missions in life. As I said at the beginning of the show, this idea that we have some very clear purpose often misguides people when they can't identify what their purpose is and they feel lost. And it's more the practice of getting there than where there is that I think the self-actualized person is the master of. They might feel they have a sense of a mission, but they're not necessarily going to limit themselves by saying what that mission is. Nevertheless, they will pursue it, they will pursue their path on their own. They're very autonomous, as I've said. They've generally got a good opinion of other people. They take a positive approach to the world. So they see other people generally in a good light. They often are recognized in that way themselves, but whether or not they get recognized, whether or not they get rewarded for what they do, they're pretty independent of all of that and carry on following their own path and their own growth. They seem to appreciate life as if they are encountering it for the very first time every time. So Maslow says self-actualizing people have the wonderful capacity to appreciate again and again, freshly and naively, the basic goods of life with awe, pleasure, wonder, and even ecstasy, however stale those experiences may have become to others. We often describe feelings of jadedness and being tired of everything that way. We're always wanting the new, and wanting the new creates a lot of discomfort and restlessness and dissatisfaction. The key of the self-actualized person is that they don't need the new. The old is fresh to them every time. They're able to see potentials in things, see something new, approach it again from a different point of view. They generally won't take a negative attitude towards almost everything. So there's a lot of living in the present. We've heard over the various different teachers that we've looked at frequently, the constant refrain is about being in the now, being in the present, focusing only on what there is, not regret, not what we hope for, none of those things, but rather what there is. And that living in the present is often experienced by the self-actualized person, according to Maslow, as a peak experience. These days we often call that being in the zone, being with the flow, or something like that. So it's very much like the maximum out of the present moment. That peak experience is a characteristic that self-actualized people experience more frequently than other people. Yet they have a strong feeling of identification and sympathy for other people. They generally love all people. They feel connected to people. They want to feel connected to people. They feel the idea of everyone being part of a single family or a single race. But bear in mind, they feel no pressure to conform to it, and they still prefer their own company. So those are distinguishing characteristics. It's not just love everyone and everything, which sometimes reveals a lot of insecurity in a person. But we're talking about a self-actualized person who can balance that inner sense of comfort with one's own self and ability to be with one's own self, with this experience of identification with people on the whole, people in general. What Maslow found is that everyone that he identified as self-actualized are what he called democratic people. They don't judge others. They see everyone as the same, can be friendly with everyone. It doesn't matter where they come from, what their background is, what their beliefs are, anything like that. In fact, to the extent that they don't even seem to recognize those things at all. It's pretty much that what's important to most people about other people the standards we hold them to, the ways that we judge them or read them, or all those things that we do all the time, the self-actualized person doesn't even see those things. Those things don't even occur to him or her, but rather just sees another human being. Sounds great, but clearly not something easy to achieve in a world that is constantly full of judgment, and in the world that we live in today, which is so full of recrimination, cancel culture, and all of those kind of things that make people more willing than ever to judge each other and to pronounce that judgment and to act on that judgment in some way. On the other hand, the self-actualized individual tends to, as I've said, on the one hand, see everyone very democratically and have very close links to relatively few people. So they see everyone with a lot of love, but deep love, strong friendships, those are very often small in number. So they have a small circle of tight friends, but they're very, very warm and welcoming and accommodating to everyone else. So that is a characteristic that's also quite noticeable. They love the few profoundly, but they love everyone too. And it isn't just based on a kind of a hippie ethic. It is ethics. It's this understanding of the democratic equality of everyone that also is an understanding that everyone is equally flawed, because self-actualized people do not believe they're perfect. They recognize their own flaws, but they accept themselves about that, which is very important. They also have a very strong sense of traditional ethics of right and wrong. They've got a very strong sense of that and will always avoid taking the wrong approach. They simply won't do wrong. Again, whatever right or wrong is, there is usually a cultural idea of that, but remember, the self-actualized person has got a very strong internal compass with regards to that. One of the things I've said about them is that they have a mission, and it's about the process of getting there. But it is true that self-actualized people are very goal-oriented. The means is often less important than the ends. They're not Machiavellian by saying that the means justifies the ends, but that they're strongly focused towards what is going to arise out of this. And because they are naturally ethical people, they want the best to arise out of everything. You know, along with that naturally ethical and spontaneous comes great humor and great creativity. I mean, firstly, they mostly find everything funny. They're able to see the humor in everything, but not at other people's misfortune. It's rare for self-actualized people to laugh at other people's misfortune, or to laugh at hostile humor, anything which makes someone feel inferior in some way. And they don't laugh at things which target authority or which are offensive. All of those things, they might sound a bit like a goody two-shoes, but it's coming from an internal ethic that really recognizes the equality in everyone. And perhaps they'd be willing to laugh at someone else's misfortune if they're able to laugh at their own at the same time. Creativity is that other characteristic that really they just take a creative approach to everything that they do, to the extent that Maslow asserted this is a universal characteristic of all the people he studied. There is no exception. So it's quite a very powerful idea that creativity, we often give lip service to it. We identify ourselves as creative beings, as a creative species, all of those kinds of things, but we also seem to think that some people have it and some people don't. Creativity is a natural human function. Everyone has the capacity for it, and self-actualized people apply it to everything that they do. And creativity also means it comes from themselves. So as I've said, they resist cultural pressure and social pressure. and they take a personal approach to everything that is guided by a certain detachment from this culture or this trends that they might be immersed in. And that ability to be independent of cultural trends doesn't make one old-fashioned or out of sync, but rather makes one self-reliant and focused on what comes from within, the ethic, the recognition of that basic humanity that everyone shares. Still, Maslow points out that they are human and they are imperfect. He says they show many of the lesser human failings. They too are equipped with silly, wasteful, or thoughtless habits. They can be boring, stubborn, and irritating. They are by no means free from a rather superficial vanity, pride, and partiality to their own productions. Temper outbursts are not rare. Maslow makes the point that these are ordinary people. At this point you might be thinking, this is a list of things I could never be. But we are reminded that you can be, because in all of that is still a human being striving to be that. Being that some of the time, hopefully most of the time, probably not all of the time. And Maslow pointed out that that is a misunderstanding that is often attributed to his work, that he's speaking about some kind of superhuman figure. While he did think they were still rare, other theorists have not seen that as rare, and pointing out that since they are still composed of many of the human failings, they've just rather got a different approach to dealing with them. Well, then all of us have the potential to be in that category. It depends more on things like values than things like those behaviors. Although, as I've said, the behaviors are generally aimed to be democratic, it's the value system, this firm, clear value system, an acceptance of the nature of the self, of human nature, of the nature of society, and the nature of physical reality. The acceptance on that, which then builds a strong value system that informs this democratic, egalitarian, and loving interaction with other human beings. That is what characterizes a self-actualized person. So what can we do to work towards self-actualization? The first thing, perhaps the most important thing, is to practice acceptance. Accepting what happens, accepting what comes, accepting yourself, and accepting others. Secondly, learning to live more spontaneously, enjoying the moment as it comes, without worrying about what we should be doing. That's a very powerful change for a lot of people. There is no should be, there is only this. So learning to live in that moment fully and enjoy that moment fully. Then getting comfortable with yourself, learning to spend more time alone. While your relationships are important, it's just as important to nurture that relationship with yourself. So spending time alone and learning to love it also teaches us to focus on self-actualization. Appreciating the small things in life. It's a bit of a cliche, but nevertheless it's still related to understanding the present is everything. Loving what there is, not what there should be. And accepting things as they are, rather than as they should be. It doesn't mean they don't work to improve things. We know that they do. But appreciating the small things and starting from there is how we get there. Then there is not worrying about what other people think of you. That can be a big one, powerful one. Realizing it's not about that. It's just about me being the best human being I can. It's not relevant what other people think about that. I'm doing it for me. But nevertheless, ultimately, it's developing compassion. Self-actualized people have a lot of compassion for everyone and everything, beyond the people they know, beyond even human beings, to humanity, to the world and life as a whole. If all of us could develop that on our path to self-actualization, then self-actualization will not only make us each a better person, but will make a much better world. The great thing is that we don't need anything special, we don't need to know anything special. We just need to start with ourselves, and in a way much more meaningfully than that famous talk show host might have meant, learning to live our best life. I'll be back next week at the same time.